Well, good afternoon, Saints. Steve Cavalli here again. Little unshaven today. Um, it's the 17th of August, and I'm going to try to record chapter 3 of my life story. I just kind of want to pick up in my late teen years, okay? I graduated a little early from Sonoma High. I graduated at 17. I may backtrack a little to pick up a couple of cute stories that I had forgotten to put in chapter 2. But I graduated in 1964, so I kind of want to cover that period um, from maybe my last year of high school through my time in the military. We'll see if we can get all of that into today, right? So, just to back up another cute story, I was a 4 year ag student at Sonoma High School. Joined the FFA, had chickens and a steer, and I think I made reference to that in the last video. So, as part of the initiation into FFA, our teacher, Mr. Livingston, who is now passed away, um, had determined that to get into FFA, um, you had to castrate sheep with your teeth. I'm not lying. He said, I'll teach you the new way to do it, but first I want you to learn the way that the old shepherds did it. So that's what we had to do. They brought in about 5 or 6 sheep that needed to be castrated. One of the ranches donated the sheep, I remember, and of course, somebody would hold the poor little creatures by their legs, and the little testicular sac would be there, and you would take a pocket knife and whack the tip off that little sac, press it down, and the two little testes would stick up, at which point you would grab one with your teeth and stretch it, and take a knife and serrate the cord that held that testicle to the cord. And of course, when you successfully severed the cord, it would flop up on your face like a piece of spaghetti, and you'd have to peel it off and spit out the testicle and throw it away. I'm serious. They'd sue the school now. Parents would sue the school, but you have to realize that Sonoma was an ag community and a small farm town in those days, no tourism nor anything that we have today. So parents just thought that was cute and would never sue. Well, anyway, I did it. And all they would give us is a stick of chewing gum. You couldn't even wash your mouth out after doing it. Stick of chewing gum, and you got to spit multiple times. Well, anyway, couple cute stories. One of the prettiest cheerleaders, one of the football cheerleaders, a real doll, pretty little blonde. She was an ag student, and she didn't want to go down there twice, so she got two with one bite, and pulled them up, and serrated that thing and popped those things that hit her, and she'd have to peel them off. But she got two with one bite, and of course everybody applauded. But it went around the school, and nobody dated her for 3 months after that. They said, she's a nut biter, don't date that one. That poor girl, she could hardly ever live that down. And another cute story, one of the tough football jocks, Jerry Cooper, who has also passed away now, bless his soul. He was one of the tough guys that used to punch everybody out, and little stocky little bulldog of a guy. He passed out at the sight of blood, passed out colder than a cucumber, and they had to revive him with smelling salts. And he lost his reputation for being a tough guy. Well, anyway, that was a story from Sonoma High, right? Okay. So, yeah, so I graduated. I was 17. And that's when I started falling into sin. I was falling into sin before that. At 16, I had my driver's license. And we were, siphoning gas at night out of people's tanks, go at 2 o'clock in the morning with a black rubber hose and empty somebody's gas tank into a 5-gallon can and then put it in ours so we could go running around, and I was drinking at that point in time, a lot of alcohol, began to smoke cigarettes. Um, about that time, I guess shortly after I graduated, I met a very pretty young woman that was quite well developed physically, and started sleeping with her. And turned out she was 13 at the time. Well, no, let me back up a little bit. That's true. That was Elaine. So I, took her virginity at that time, and she ended up moving back to Phoenix, Arizona. But I mean, that was my first serious love affair, quote unquote. I did love her. I did, and even pursued her as far as going back to Phoenix and trying to connect with her. But she was still very young and in school, and that relationship fell by the wayside. So from 17 to 19, I was going to the Santa Rosa Junior College. I took classes in small business administration and was pulling straight A's in everything. I took 2 years of general ed and 2 years of business administration, advertising, that sort of thing. And, sleeping around wherever I could. About that time, and I'm talking 1966, I guess, the hippie movement was beginning down in Haight-Ashbury. And I had a friend that was starting to dabble in psychedelics, and he got me involved in smoking pot. And at that point, I started going to the Fillmore Auditorium and the Avalon Ballroom in San Francisco and listening to groups like Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead and Janis Joplin and the Byrds, several others. And I started getting into the hippie culture at that point. Started taking some LSD with friends, and at that point, it started affecting my whole philosophy. And I started growing my hair long and, dressing in hippie clothing, painting my pants with day-glow colors and all of that. About that time, I got my draft notice. The Vietnam War was starting full swing, and I got my draft notice. My draft notice gave me like a month to sign up for the draft. I'm still at the junior college, mind you. I'm still getting my education. But I was quite afraid of dying, being in the Army and being in the infantry and being on the front lines. So I felt the best thing I could do was to go down and join the Navy before my draft appointment, which is what I did. So I went down and signed up for the Navy 4-year tour. And they offered me some schooling, which I accepted, storekeeper school. I went to, it involved accounting and management of warehouses and shipping and receiving and all of that stuff. So I got that whole education under my belt, especially the bookkeeping part. And they sent me to San Diego for boot camp. When I walked in, of course, I had long hair down past my shoulders, and they laughed and said, how would you like your haircut? And I very stupidly told him, well, I'd like it a little long, if you could just leave it a little long and maybe just give it a trim. And they said, yeah, we'll do that. And of course, they got the razors and just went right down. I mean, just shaved me bald. And And so there we were in boot camp in San Diego, about 3 or 4 months. And of course, I didn't want to go to Vietnam. That was why I joined the Navy. Well, my first set of orders actually was pretty good. They sent me up to Kodiak, Alaska for 1 year. So I'm up in Kodiak Island, Alaska, managing a warehouse up there. And it was a beautiful duty station, really quite isolated. I mean, the town of Kodiak was about the size of the town of Glen Ellen. Not many people living there. And the island was pretty isolated from everything. And it was called the Banana Belt of Alaska because of the ocean and the warm current that was there. Um, it never really snowed in too much, you know. It would snow and you'd get 6 inches, maybe 12 inches on the ground, and a couple of days later, a week later, it would you'd get a sunny day and it would melt off. So it was a pretty nice duty station. And in the summers, of course, you had the long summer days. I remember in the summer, the sun going down at 11:30 p.m. and coming up at 1 a.m. and never really getting dark. Just the sun would just dip below the horizon and then come up again. So from 11:30 to 1 a.m., you had kind of a twilight, you know. You could walk around and see everything with the naked eye. Um, so that was a pretty amazing duty station. It turned out that they didn't care what you did from Friday night until Monday morning, as long as you were at work Monday morning. So we had the weekends off, basically, and they didn't care if you lived in town or if you lived on the base. If you wanted to rent a house, you could rent a house. Well, about a mile away from the base on a dirt road was an abandoned army base that was used in World War One. And when I say abandoned, I mean it was abandoned. It was overgrown with vines and trees. There was nothing out there, just these old Quonset huts, you know, that were out in the middle of nowhere on a dirt road. And so some friends and I decided to move into one of those Quonset huts. And so we got an oil burning stove and installed it and got some beds and some basic furniture downtown. And we ended up living off base in these Quonset huts. Well, that immediately began to be a party location. And a lot of the teenage girls from downtown would come out there. And of course, we were getting them drunk and sleeping with them and introducing them to pot. And we had LSD and something called DMT, with dimethyltryptamine, which was an incredibly powerful hallucinogenic. For about 30 minutes, you'd be in la la land. You'd smoke that DMT and you were gone for 30 minutes. I mean, somebody could shake your body on the floor and you would not respond. You were floating down tubes of exploding color and hallucinations like you can't imagine. Well, you know, we had people shipping us all this stuff. You know, our friends back home were sending us care packages with you know, Dexedrine tablets and LSD and DMT and pot. I mean, we were getting packages every 2 weeks from our friends. So, you know, we were really leading a lot of these town kids astray. You know, we had a 12-foot American flag for our bedspread, and we had stolen some empty bombshells from the base and had them hanging from the ceiling. And, you know, a lot of other stolen government property that we were using in our house. And finally, there was, I guess, an investigation on us, and they found us. They found our place out there, and they charged us with about 8 or 10 charges. You know, possession of stolen government property, desecrating the national ensign, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, illegal drug use and sale, and they had about 9 charges on us, and quite serious, you know, a court-martial for all of us. I lived with one guy from the Coast Guard and one guy from the Army that was stationed at a small outpost there. So there were essentially three of us that, quote, owned the house, or were the primaries, and several others that slept there often. So they filed charges against all of us. And I was hoping that they would discharge me, even if it was a dishonorable discharge. I hated the military and I wanted to get out. Well, the other two guys took the primary hit. They did get dishonorable discharges, and they were discharged from the military. They couldn't prove a lot of the charges against us, and the charges were dropped mostly, but discharge was the penalty. My work record was so good that they did not discharge me. I was too valuable of an employee, even though I was drugging quite heavily. I was functioning really well in the workplace, and all my work was in order. And so they sent me to Anchorage to see a psychiatrist because I told them that I was having hallucinations and, hearing voices and all of this, which I wasn't, of course, but I wanted out. I wanted out of the service, and I wanted out with a honorable discharge. So they sent me several times to Anchorage to a psychiatrist, and I was examined, and never convinced them that I was a liability to the Navy or anything. And so nothing became of it, bottom line, and I ended up moving back on the base and was not charged with anything. Amazing, really amazing. So where do we go from there? Okay, so then let me just mention one beautiful part of being in Kodiak. The salmon would come up the river so thick in the migration that you could not cross the river without stepping on one of them. And you could gather them by the handful. And everybody on the island had smokers. Everybody. Smoked salmon was as common as chicken in Alaska. And you know how much I love smoked salmon. And everybody would give us smoked salmon. And we would catch salmon and cook it and eat it. And it was amazing. And halibut, my gosh, the biggest halibut I've ever seen, these 50 and 70 pound halibut that would come in. Well, I actually, being a smart hippie, I was still a hippie, believe me, even though they had cut my hair and I was in the military. My mentality was a hippie, but I was a smart hippie. And like I told you, I had to be at the base from 8 in the morning until 4:30 when I got off work. Then it was my time. Well, I went downtown and I signed up for a 4-hour shift at one of the canneries downtown. So I would work from like 6 to 10 every day at the cannery. And I'm talking making good money. I mean, like $17 an hour back then. And if you worked extra, if you worked an hour or two extra or on weekends, then you got time and a half pay or even double time. So I worked my whole year in Kodiak. I had private job downtown after work and on weekends. And I made a ton of money. Several $1,000s that I put in the bank that way. And of course, spent a lot of it on drugs, but I did quite well for myself, my military pay plus what I was making at the job. Well, after my 1-year tour ended, they gave me orders to Vietnam. And I spent 1 year on shore in Cam Ranh Bay. Cam Ranh Bay was south of where the actual shelling was, so I wasn't so much involved in the shelling or the war. As a matter of fact, if you could picture Florida being a peninsula, so if you could picture a small model of Florida, we were at the very tip of the peninsula, the very tip. And between us and the mainland was the Army base and the Air Force base. So basically, we were untouchable. Even if the Viet Cong got through the Air Force, they would have to hit the Army. And if they got through the Army, they'd get to us. So they did hit the Air Force several times, and there were a lot of skirmishes and gunfire and bombs and stuff at the Air Force Base, but it never got to us out at the end of Cam Ranh Bay. So I had a pretty good duty station out there. I managed 3 warehouses out there, and had another. I won't go into how I got it, but I managed to get a beautiful surfboard, a 7'10" surfboard, and incredible break right off the barracks stairs. I mean, literally, our barracks were right on the beach. Come out the back door of the barracks, and 20 yards, and you were standing on the beach. And this incredibly hot little wave that got up to about 4 or sometimes 5 feet if there was a storm. But it was hollow and tubular. And I got so good. I mean, I've been surfing before I went to Vietnam. I was surfing from high school in Bolinas. We used to surf in Bolinas and Salmon Creek. And so I was fairly good before I went to Vietnam, but I got excellent in Vietnam. I mean, just riding the tip of the nose and these hollow little waves. Everybody wanted my surfboard. If I wasn't on it, it was in use. We had people lined up for it, and they'd be out there surfing till midnight by the moonlight. I mean, that's how in demand my surfboard was. Well, finally, about halfway through my duty station, they imported about 8 or 9 great big planks, I call them, big tandem boards, useless things. And at that point, the wave was ruined. I mean, you had so many people on the wave, you couldn't surf there. And we knew of a couple of other spots up the coast, a little ways that we could hike to. So yeah, very good surfing over there. Steak and lobster twice a week. We had our own gambling casino with slot machines and all that. And it was a very easy duty station. Now, like I said, I was managing a couple of warehouses. Well, one thing that came through our warehouse, everything that went to the north, to the DMZ, where the fighting was, everything came through us. Everything from toilet paper to meals to, medical supplies, everything came through us, and we would ship it north. Well, sinful man that I was, there were survival packs that were meant for the soldiers on the front lines so that if they were under fire for several days, they could survive. And in those survival packs was food and bandages and all of that stuff. And also in the survival packs were Dexedrine tablets to keep them awake if they were under fire. And if they could not afford to fall asleep for fear of their life, they could stay awake with these Dexedrine tabs. Well, guess what I did? I opened all the survival packs and stole the Dexedrine out of them, and some of the better foodstuffs I would steal out of those packs. And I'm just confessing my sinful state before Jesus Christ came into my life. So anyway, that was my Vietnam experience. Oh, there's so much more. So much more. On Friday night, we didn't have to check in until Monday morning. And our base was surrounded by coils of barbed wire, so you couldn't get out. But I found a way to dig under the barbed wire, dig a hole under the barbed wire, and I would get out and I would hitchhike all over the country, if you can imagine. And I'm in military uniform, and I'm hitchhiking around the country of Vietnam. Could have been shot by the Viet Cong anywhere at risk of my life. But anyway, I used to go up to a city called Nha Trang, which was up north about an hour from our base, and I would buy pounds of sifted marijuana up there. I had 2 duffel bags, travel bags with the 2 handles, I had 2 of those bags, and I would fill them with plastic bags of sifted marijuana that I would buy up north. And I would hitchhike back to the base through military checkpoints, mind you, that should have checked my bags. But because I was in uniform and because I looked to be a soldier traveling, most of the guys at the checkpoints were just like me, young kids. And we'd strike up a conversation and they'd wave me through. Do you know what a chance I had of being caught and being put in prison for 10 to 15 years in those days? If you were caught with that much marijuana in those days, especially smuggling it to a military